So Mel Gibson says that the Catholic Church is actually in apostasy right now, and it's actually a fake church that's parallel with God's true church. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. We're going to dive into this and look at some of the claims that are made and also what the Catholic Church itself actually has done, contrary to what the Bible teaches. So the first thing I want to call out is Mel Gibson during this interview with Joe Rogan. They cover a lot of ground. And by no means am I saying Mel Gibson is the authority Bible teacher or scholar, but the fact is he produced one of the most widely watched and celebrated Christian films, which is Passion of the Christ, and he's working on a film right now about the resurrection. So it's very interesting here what he's saying, and also the fact that he's calling out a church, which he says he's a member of. He says that he's a Catholic, but he still calls out this church in a really crazy way. So we're going to dive into it, and I'll kind of pick up from where he left off. He talks about a quote from a particular cardinal, I believe, but we'll go ahead, or bishop rather. Listen to what he says right here.
From what it was intended to be and what it is. Almost, there's a guy called Bishop Vigano who says it's a counterfeit parallel church. And it's running an entirely different religion.
Now, if you caught that right there, he's quoting this guy, Bishop Vino, I believe. I don't want to mispronounce this. I tried to Google search this person. I couldn't find it. I probably could find it if I dug a little bit more. But I'm going to take Mel Gibson at his word that this person actually said this. He says it is a counterfeit church, the current Catholic Church, and it's running parallel and teaching a completely different religion. Now, this is absolutely the truth. And what's pretty powerful is that when we look at Scripture, over and over again, we see that there are two churches in the Bible. There is the true church of God, which is equated to usually a virgin or a woman or a bride. Christ is considered the bridegroom. And then there is a counterfeit church, which is called a harlot. And every time that Israel as a nation or a people went away from what God instructed them to do, they were called harlots as well. You see this all throughout Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the prophets. It constantly iterates this fact that when God's people went after other idols, did false worship, committed abominations, sacrificed their children, whatever it might be, that they were considered a harlot and they were going after their harlotries. This is a constant theme throughout the Scripture. And we know this is the truth because whenever Isaiah or Jeremiah would prophesy over Israel, they say, turn away from your lovers, turn away from your harlotries and return to me and be my bride. We also see in the book of Revelation as well that when Christ returns, he's coming for his bride. The bridegroom is coming back for his bride. And we see this language all throughout the parables and how Christ describes his second coming. But what I thought was interesting is he talks about this. Mel Gibson talks about this a little bit. And then he goes on to talk about a specific act that the Pope did, which he thoroughly considers apostasy, which I also agree with. So right here, he calls out this event that Pope Francis was involved in called bringing in the Pachamama.
Yeah, you could find it agreed with itself. But all of a sudden, you got something else to the point where now, I mean, we got a Pope that brought a South American idol into the church to worship.
Really?
He did. The Pachamama. He bought the South American, and he got.
I don't know what that is.
It's kind of like a South American god, Pachamama.
Why would he do that? Now, what's interesting here, the reason that he's saying, why did he do that? We do have an explanation on that, and I want to kind of cover that as well. But the Pachamama is a South American idol goddess. It's literally worshipped. It is a pagan deity. Now, as far as why Pope Francis did this, why he brought it in, we have an answer. We have it directly from Pope Francis why they did that. So we'll jump over here. This is the Catholic News Agency. And we can see right here this article, Enculturation is a necessary process in the Amazon, Pope Francis says. Now, we'll dive right into why he did it. He's quoting it right here. As she preserves, he's talking about the church. By the way, crazy thing, the Catholic Church refers to itself as the Mother Church. And we're going to see right now in the book of Revelation, chapter 17, that the Mother Church is described as the mother of all harlotries. So right here, this is what Pope says needs to happen. As she preserves the preaching of the Kerygm, let's see right here, Kerygma, the apostolic proclamation of salvation through Jesus Christ. That's what that means. So as she preserves this particular message, the church also needs to grow in the Amazon region. In doing so, she constantly reshapes her identity through listening and dialogue with the people, the realities and the history of the lands which she finds herself in. So what the Pope is saying is that in order to preach this gospel, we need to adapt and adopt their culture and belief system. Now, it would be one thing to say, okay, we're going to adapt to the culture. We're going to kind of introduce ourselves. And if the South American people are going to do XYZ, then we're going to do XYZ to reach them. But in fact, what they've done is they've brought in a literal idol into the church. If you go on down here, the Pope continues to kind of describe this process. This is, again, the Pope. It is possible to take up an indigenous symbol in some way without necessarily considering it as idolatry, Francis wrote. A myth charged with spiritual meaning can be used to an advantage and not is always considered pagan error. Now, the crazy part about this is that you have someone, Mel Gibson, who clearly think this is apostasy. I don't know how much of a practicing Christian he is or a Catholic he is, but he sees this as apostasy. And the reality is you're not acknowledging this idol. You're not just saying, oh, this is something they worship, this is something they do, but instead you are bringing it into the Vatican. And they even did like a tour where they kind of worshiped and had celebrations around this particular idol. I think some parishioners threw the idol into the river or something like that, and the Pope apologized about it. So this is a very clear example of idol worship and apostasy. Now, what we're going to do is jump to Exodus 20 and just read what the Ten Commandments start out with. The Ten Commandments being the foundation of God's law, not only for Israel, but for all of humanity. So he goes on to say, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Commandment number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Commandment number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, what's incredible about this is that, again, in the Bible, we see this same error that they're committing right now in Israel, where kings of Israel, whether it was King Ahab or King Jehoiakim, taking down idols, putting them in the high places, and then even erecting false idols in the temple of God. We see this over and over and over. And God is like, hey, you're committing harlotries, don't do it. So you have the mother church committing the harlotries and essentially bringing. Now, like I said earlier, they call themselves the Mother Church. And what's interesting is that in Revelation 17, we see right here, then one of the 7 angels came with the 7 bowls, saying to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. And here, right here in chapter 17, verse 5, and on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth. So what does the mother of harlots mean? It means that if this is talking about an apostate church, which it is, the mother has what? Daughters of harlotry. Again, this is talked about all throughout Scripture. So you have this Catholic Church who says they're the mother church, committing abominations, committing idolatry, committing apostasy. This is what Revelation 17 is talking about. Revelation 17 dives in pretty deep, and it even goes on to describe the woman arrayed in purple and scarlet. If I type in purple and scarlet church, just pop this up, go to images. We see the bishops and the cardinals dressed in the Catholic Church. Obviously, this is very well known. Even if you look at the Pope's headrest, so the Pope's hat, if you look at, let's say, the Babylonian priest attire, you can see how they're dressed. Look at their headrest. Look at what they're wearing upon their head. And even the priests of Dagon as well, Dagon priest. You can see this right here. The priest of Dagon, this is someone who's making that comparison. Dagon fish hat, the same thing as the Catholic Pope Francis. You see all this because they worship the fish god. So this is not the first time that the Catholic Church has introduced or allowed harlotry to come into them in order to adapt and adopt and spread what they believe is the apostolic mission, which again, I believe is just apostasy. If we look at Jeremiah 1, we see some interesting things that the Lord is saying to Jeremiah that's being quoted here. The Lord said to me, Jeremiah, this is Jeremiah 1:14, out of all the north calamity shall break forth on all the inhabitants of the land. For behold, I am calling all families of the kingdoms of the north. They shall come, each one his throne, and shall enter in the gates of Jerusalem against its walls and around its city. It's pronouncing judgment. I will utter my judgments against them concerning their wickedness. Why? What is wicked? Because they have forsaken me, burned incense to other gods, and worshipped the works of their own hands. This is exactly what's happening right now with the Pope. And it's incredible that Mel Gibson is the one to call this out and to bring this to the forefront. So with all that being said, kind of what's the big takeaway here, right? I'm sure there's lots of very incredible Catholic people, very incredible Catholic Christians who we will see in heaven, who served God with their full heart, who adhered to the truth and the light that they were given and desired to have that relationship with Christ. But you have this institution, the Catholic Church as an institution that has committed apostasy and heresy over and over and over again. And somehow as a Christian Protestant church, we forget what Martin Luther did and forget their dark history where they killed and tortured thousands upon thousands of people during the Crusade, during the Inquisition, because they did not agree with the Catholic Church. So when we kind of take that into context and just look at what's happening right now, how can we turn a blind eye to what's going on in the Catholic Church? We have people calling it out. And the fact that Mel Gibson himself even kind of brings up the fact of, oh, I'm a practicing Catholic, but they're committing apostasy. Pretty incredible stuff to see. But yeah, I wanted to cover that, kind of dive into what the scripture actually says, what we've seen historically as error, and hopefully shed some light on this topic. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you spending time diving into this. Again, FLF here. Shout out to Joe Rogan and Mel Gibson for having this conversation. And as always, share this with somebody who might feel convicted about it or that you might want to spread it to. Let's continue to do the good work, spread the gospel, and light of Babylon. God bless.